Welcome everybody to Behind the Couch. I am Dr. Shiloh, and I'm here with my bestie,
Scott. Hi, everybody.
Long-term friend, colleague, fairy godfather of my daughter. You know,
I try.
Lots of different things. You play many roles in my life. Welcome, you guys. Happy Saturday. Thanks for being with us. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode on the Skid Row slasher and vampirism, which led us down many a roads. Actually, Scott, somebody on, I think, the Twitter today asked if welcome everybody to Behind the Couch. There I am.
I fixed it.
Do you watch What We Do in the Shadows? I thought you did, right?
Not consistently, but I really like it when I watch it. I watched the first movie, and I think it's genius.
Yeah, I can hear all of that, Scott.
Okay, well, that's going to have to go away.
Yeah, that's okay. But anyway, She said it was great about old vampires and the lives of them, since we were talking about vampires this week.
Yeah, it's a great thing. It's got lots of really great jokes. There's like some Office, some stuff that's sort of reminiscent of The Office.
Is it like a mockumentary, sort of?
Yeah, the original movie is by the guys that did Flight of the Conchords.
Oh, okay.
The producers and one of the actors. And it's all of these vampires that live together, and kind of the typical vampire, like they don't, like the thing that's great about it is they can't go out in the sun, garlic, all that stuff is right. But some of them are just completely clueless, like as to like what's going on in the real world, and they just can't really get up to speed. And then they have really great guest stars, like Tilda Swinton kind of drops in. The vampire.
Yeah, she's definitely a vampire.
She's like queen of the weird stuff, so.
Yeah. How crazy was the Burt Reynolds story, you guys? Like, I thought that piece was, I'm so grateful that I found it, and that there was this interview with him still there. I mean, so crazy. I ended up calling my father-in-law, whose cousin is my relative that she still lives one down from where Burt Reynolds used to live. And I'm like, do you remember this story? Did Aunt JoJo tell you about this? And he's like, oh God, yeah. It wasn't like some guy with a hatchet. And I said, yep. And he's like, yeah, she was definitely living there and was friends with Bert and Lonnie back then. She actually used to paint. Last time I was at her house, she's a former opera singer, and she paints as well. And she had a big painting of Burt Reynolds in her house that she had done of him, and I don't know why she had it back. Maybe it was like, okay, you can have this back. But yeah, kind of just kooky people living up there with lots of money. But yeah, story.
I back in Chicago, I worked years ago. I danced with a bunch of people that had done musicals down at the Oslo. Like he had an amazing theater school and theater down in Oslo. That was like a training program for actors in summer stock theater. And really, I mean, he had a lot of problems that were like a lot of things that got misinterpreted, thinking that he was a drug addict when he wasn't. He had, I don't know if anybody knows some interesting trivia, but he had a horrific wisdom tooth surgery when he was in his 50s. That put in the bridge work completely fucked up the placement of his jaw, and he was in constant pain, and it affected his hearing, and he started having like almost manic episodes, and that's one of the reasons started having to self-medicate with alcohol and painkillers, which is why like Lonnie finally left him. And then there was somehow he found this dentist that said, your guy fucked your mouth up, I can fix this. And then they went in and basically had to yank all of his back teeth out, put in the appropriate size, replace his jaw, not replace it, but put it in the right position.
Right.
And then he was back working again. Like that's when you suddenly saw him come back and do boogie nights and these other things before he got sort of too old to work. But what a fascinating story. He was always very, very supportive of young performers.
That's really cool. Wow. So we have a couple of new patrons, and then we need to do our giveaway.
Yay.
Yay. So I know one of our new patrons is in our audience tonight. I am going to butcher your name. I know it. So if you want to throw a little
a phonetic
of how to say it, please forgive me already. But we have two new patrons. We have Mary J. Ooh, Mary Jane, maybe. Mary J. And then our other new patron is the one that I'm going to butcher. I'm so sorry. I'll send you some extra swag or something. Aofi M. I'm going to go with that. That is my pronunciation. Thank you guys very, very much for your patronage. We appreciate it so, so much.
So is that Celtic or Welsh?
I don't know.
I'll bet it's something that is like completely. It's Dr. Chill, of course, says it's Celtic. I'm gonna Effie. Is it Effie or Ufa?
Ufa? Oh, okay. That's beautiful.
It is beautiful. I love the spelling of it too. Very cool. I have to also say, I want everybody to know that right now in our Facebook audience is one of my dearest friends and coworkers, Nurse Maureen, Psych Nurse Maureen, who I have not seen in a week since I've been taking some time off work. Maureen, I'm so happy you're here.
She's awesome.
She is awesome.
Cool. All right, so let's do this raffle. And this month it is going to be a tote bag that has the little saying that's on the sticker: podcasts and doctors and true crime and psychology and snark, folks.
Oh my.
Oh my. Oh my.
Oh my.
All right, let's see who the winner is today. I love being able to give things back to you guys. It's the best.
I want to take everybody out for drinks. I wish we could figure out a way to do that.
It's our friend Nick and Mel from the 10ish podcast.
Oh, cool.
Awesome. Very cool. I miss those guys. We need to team up and do something with them again. They're the ones we did our top 10 smartest serial killers get vocal with. It was a lot of
They're so
fun.
raunchy.
I
like
love
every
them.
time I do too. They're completely unfiltered and hilarious. I love it.
Yeah. They're really, their show is just so good. So announcement, this week on the podcast episode, we talked about wanting to do the Halloween Horror Nights meetup. We have officially locked in our date. So if you are local to Los Angeles or you want to travel from somewhere, buy your tickets. If you're going to go into the park for Halloween Horror Nights with Scott and I, October 9th, it's a Saturday. Our friends Tammy and Bryce from Holly Weird Paranormal are also going to be there. What we're going to do is meet up at a bar at Downtown City Walk first. It will probably be the new NBC. I think it's called Grill and Brew. It's new. It has kind of a cool outdoor patio space, so we won't be trapped inside too much. And then we're going to go into the park for Halloween Horror Nights. So Tammy is definitely doing it. Bryce is scared to death because he's a big scary cat, but I think we got him convinced. I think we're almost
I told him I would hand him Xanax after Xanax if we could get through it.
Yes. So we have our date. We're for sure doing it. Please, if you're local, consider coming out. And if you can't even go into the park, I get it. It's not everyone's thing right now. We hope it's safe enough to do so. It's expensive. It can be. And I know these are tough times, but come have a beer with us. At least come down to City Walk and get out a little bit.
Yeah.
Come hang. That would be wonderful.
And I'm sorry, just to reiterate too, if you are able to join us, which we would love for you to join us, We are going for the higher price tickets so that we can fast track. And that's important to know because like we'd all like, you know, if you want to come and join us physically, then we want you to get the higher tickets so that we can all be together. And that's totally for me because my old arthritic feet, I mean, because you're on concrete all night. I mean, it's great. But you're doing a lot of walking, a lot of standing. You're definitely going to get your steps in. I mean, going up and down the steps.
Yeah, it's the Universal Express Pass. So you get on you get a fast pass essentially to get on every single attraction once. If not, I mean, the tickets are still, you know, they're pretty pricey anyway because it's a special event. But why do you want to pay all that money and then go on 2 things because you're standing in like 2-hour lines? Yeah. So it's worth it. We're not just being divas for Scott or anything like that. It totally makes the night a more enjoyable night because you get to do more. So it's going to be a blast. It's always super fun. It's a fun Southern California thing or Florida thing, I guess, if you live there, to do. So it's also a
huge moneymaker for Universal. Like when my buddy Bob was working there a few years ago, he was talking about the numbers about how much of a huge moneymaker it is. It'll be interesting to see. Now, all of that being said, like Delta is on the rise and who knows what's going to happen. That's the other thing is that we are going to be at the Savannah Crime Expo. We're very excited about that in September. But I've just kind of resigned myself, or I'm accepting the fact that, you know, we don't really know what's going to happen because tons of people aren't getting their vaccinations, and that's kind of mucking it up for a bunch of people. So
it is. It's nice to have these things planned, but you know, we can always adjust or sort of put things off if we have to. We'll see. Yeah. But yes, please join us if you can. What else? Anything else, Scott, before we kind of talk about what we're going to talk about?
Well, I mean, for those of you that heard this week's episode, just a reminder, we're getting some really good feedback, which is great. It was our first episode back together, like in person, sitting right next to each other. And it was really cool. It was odd in a way, but because it felt like we had gotten so used to doing it this way, like remotely. But very, very cool and very excited to be doing that again. And hopefully we'll be able to continue that.
Yeah. At least it's an option now if we want to be able to do that. It was really nice. So what are we going to talk about tonight, Scott?
So, you know, we have a couple of things to cover, and I hope we can get to both of them. But
I don't know if we'll get to both of them. But
I don't think we will either. I'm going to speed through some information, and I promise you I'm not just reading from Wikipedia, even though we love Wikipedia because Wikipedia, for the most part, really does a great job at citing sources. But this was after immersing myself. So something big happened that I want to talk about, and I don't want to, I'm going to be challenged here. I don't want to be using this person's name over and over again. And I'll tell you why I don't want to use his name over again. But Rodney Alcala, a notorious serial killer whose victims literally across the United States, as far as we know, only the United States. It could have been in Mexico as well. But he finally passed away July 24th, 2021 at the age of 77. He had a fascinating history in and out of the judicial system here in California, which is fascinating in itself. And because he has passed away, I wanted to kind of put
Mary J. Sorry, now I did it.
Oh, did you?
Sorry, that was totally me.
It's so weird. I'm hearing voices. Give me my shot. So I wanted to talk about him and give some more memorial or recognition to his victims, the ones that are deceased, the ones that survived. Just because this guy was really, his nickname was the Monster, because he was so brutal and vicious in his actions. So used some very interesting terms. Interestingly enough, he died at Corcoran State Prison, which was right next to California Substance Abuse and Treatment Facility in Corcoran. There are two prisons. Most of the prisons, majority of prisons in California are really placed in the Central California area, where there's tons of land in the middle of nowhere, and little towns kind of build up around them. So Rodney, he was there for many, many years. I did not work at that facility. I never had any contact with them. I did know some clinicians that had interactions with him, but he died at the age of 77. According to the media, he died of unknown causes, which is very interesting because if you go to the CDCR website, it clearly states that he died of natural causes. In fact, this is the quote: condemned inmate Rodney James Alcala, 77, Orange County man who was on California's death row, died of natural causes at 1:43 a.m., July 24th, 2021, at a hospital in Kings County. So he was at the age where, let me tell you, if you make it to that age, but you're in prison, you're not going to be in good health, because I'm sorry, I mean, with all due respect to the state of California and the Department of Corrections, the food is to keep you alive and barely anything else. So
yeah, I think we've covered like the lifespan of prisoners, how much shorter it is just in general for incarcerated persons.
Yeah. So I want to start with saying that his known victims include Tali Shapiro, Cornelia Michelle Crilly, Julie J., Ellen J. Hover, Monique Hoyt, Robin Sansom, Jill Barkham, Georgia Wixted, Charlotte Lamb, Parento, Christine Thornton, Antoinette Whitaker, Joyce Gaunt, Pamela Lamson, and Christine Ruth Thornton. So as I said, several of those individuals survived, but the majority of them did not. And it's indicated that he had at least another 10 unknown victims, but it's likely he actually had a great number more because of the evidence that was found in a locker after he was incarcerated. So we know that his crimes were committed in California, New York State, Washington State, and Wyoming. It's possible that he was responsible for many additional deaths across the country and possibly into Mexico that have been yet to be identified. One of the most vicious things about this guy is that he really toyed with his victims, and he strangled them until the point of losing consciousness, then brought them back, revived them, and then tortured them again. And it is said that one of the only ways that he could actually get off, or that he got his thrill, his kill satisfaction, from the amount of fear that he could constantly regenerate in his victims' eyes. One police detective described him as a killing machine, and other people have compared him to Ted Bundy. They compare him to Ted Bundy because of his ability to connect with people and at least come across as a pseudo-intellectual, and that he was generally actually attractive. And I mean, actually, it's funny because we've talked about this before too. Looking at Ted Bundy, you're like, he's okay. Alcala actually was kind of a good-looking guy for the time. That was a particular look.
Right. Yeah, and it's just because they're not socially inept, I think we then kind of put them on this pedestal of like, oh, okay, they're somewhat charming, or they can talk to people, they can move within and out different social circles well. It kind of gives them some weird little leg up when you're talking about serial killers and categorizing them.
Right. I think in this particular case, there was a name I was asking you earlier while I was watching the documentaries, if you knew this guy. They were interviewing him for one of the documentaries that is, available on YouTube. I think it's Mark Miller.
Matt Murphy.
Matt Murphy is a retired FBI who, because of a later development for our subject, who represented himself in court at his last hearing,
Of course he did.
Matt, exactly. Matt had to spend a great time talking with him as a peer-to-peer, because he's not himself anymore. He's also the individual who is representing him. So you have to
Right.
give that professional courtesy. And he says that the guy was genuinely charming. And it's just that you always had this knowledge in the back of your head of what he did. But he actually, and he said, I understood how he was able to be such a successful predator now, because he
Wow.
was able to switch it on and off. And many of the things that are talked about is how this subject was able to reinvent himself across the country. He would change locations, he would cut his hair, he would change his name, start a new hobby, always usually related to some sort of photography, and then be able to stay there for a while until something, maybe there was too much heat on him, and then he would change location. So interestingly, that there's a lot of forensic information, especially psychologically forensical.
I like that.
It's like the whiz. A lot of information that was found about him basically says, for the most part, there's not a lot of indicators as far as like what we would look at in dark triad or dark tetrad. There's certainly elements of those, and including the cruelty and the sort of violence of his crimes, but there was no known history of killing animals when he was a kid, no known history of like these behavioral issues. But one sort of key moment in his development that is certainly talked about is the fact that as a child, his grandmother became very ill in San Antonio, and her wish was respected by the family, is that she wanted to go back to Mexico to die. So the father and mother uproot the entire family, they go to Mexico, and then they're sort of reestablishing their lives, and the father takes off to come back to America to be with a new family. So he gets into a relationship. So clearly maybe some abandonment issues. I mean, that's one thing that we could think about that as maybe a factor. And then he does well in school. He does okay. He comes back to the US on his own. At 17, he joins the Army, and very quickly has a complete mental meltdown, a breakdown, and was interviewed by one of the military psychiatrists, who in the 70s very quickly diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, and they booted him out of the military very quickly. So I'm not really sure. To me, that seems a little bit incongruent or confusing, that you don't see necessarily ASPD individuals having breakdowns.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what the breakdown was, because I know a lot of times people ask us, wouldn't a psychopath or someone who's antisocial be perfect for the military? And we always say, like, no, because they can't get with the program. They don't like authority. They can't be so structured like that.
Because the rules don't apply to them.
Right. So I wonder if a quote unquote breakdown was just not going with the program. He was acting.
Well, it was
out.
after his dad died.
Okay.
So his dad died, so maybe there was a trigger, but it might have been behavioral. Like maybe he just started fighting for no reason, and that's the way they described it.
Mouthing off or talking back to superiors. Right. Who knows?
Yeah, could be.
Wow.
So he gets out. In 1968, he lures an 8-year-old, Tali Shapiro, into his LA home. He kidnaps her, he rapes her, but in the process of him tempting her, a passerby, Good Samaritan, witnesses it and feels like something's off. Why is this weirdo bringing a guy into
a girl?
A car? Why is he driving out? So he follows him to his apartment, sees him get out with the little girl. Remember, this is 68, no cell phones. He goes and he finds a phone booth, calls the police. The police actually respond. They come, and when they bang on the door, Alcala answers the door completely naked and makes some excuse like, oh, okay, well, hold on one second, let me get some clothes. Immediately jumps out the back window of the apartment, the rear of the apartment completely naked, and the one officer that's there sees Tali on the floor,
Mhm.
severely beaten, almost to the point of death, and he's got a choice. He can either take care of her, or he can either go chase the subject,
Right.
and she may die. So I think he made the right decision. She survived, and
Yeah.
she was beaten very badly with a steel pipe, as well as multiple sexual assaults. So that
And
was,
she was she was 8 years old, and he
8 years
he did
old.
he did the whole like getting her into his car. I forget what ruse he used, but she said, "I don't talk to strangers." And then he said, "Well, it's okay because I know your parents." And that was enough to get her in the car.
Yeah,
So
predator.
total predator. So we actually know the person that arrested him. Did you know this for this crime? Our good friend Steve Hodel
That's so.
actually
How
was.
crazy is that?
I know. So he was working Hollywood division as a pretty new detective over there, and this was his case. So he um, arrested him after, of course, because I know you haven't gotten there, but when he flees out of state and is gone for a couple years. But yeah, Steve Hodel um, was able to go and extradite him and bring him back and hold him accountable in the court system for Tali Shapiro's assault, rape, and attempted murder, really, kidnap, attempted murder, and rape. And at the time, Steve said that the California courts had an indeterminate sentencing back then, and he was sentenced to, now listen to this range, 1 to 99 years, and he ended up serving 2.
But do you know why?
Tell us why. I do know why.
I didn't know this. That's like this completely. Does anybody else in the chat know why? Just by any chance? This is mind blowing to me.
Right. It's terrifying.
It is. So generally, just remember when a crime occurs, law enforcement and the DA are going to go for the most charges that they absolutely can, and so they everything that they could go for in this case was rape, attempted murder, a lot of charges. What happened was the family, for non-explained reasons, but probably because they were so embarrassed, or there may have been another issue where they did not want their family to be in the spotlight. And remember, it was a very different time. It was a very different time where there's a lot of shame involved in being a victim of a crime, like a lot of shame. So the family picked up and took off to Mexico. The entire family moved. So if there's no witnesses and there's nobody and making, continuing the complaint,
right.
The only charge they could go for was molestation.
Well, and then he goes to prison, and then after 2 years, the prison psychiatrist deems him as being fine and can be released. So that's
right.
That's the terrifying part. And we know, like, obviously you're going to talk about it, but how many more people he went on to kill. But Steve Hodel was able to get him on the FBI's America's Most Wanted list in 1971. And then that's how when he got on the radar outside of California, he went and picked him up for this case.
Right. So he absconds and gets to New York, changes his name, creates a name. I think it was John Berger was what he was calling himself, enrolls in film school, and basically just sort of creates a new persona, which he does several times throughout his life, which is another thing to remember that makes this difficult to really get a full grasp on the number of his potential victims, is that his ease of reinventing himself means that he may have been coming in and out of different environments throughout the country and claiming these victims, because what was found later after his trial or during his trial was a number of still unidentified trophies. He had a habit of keeping women's earrings after he had assaulted or murdered them. So, what is very interesting here that I found to be kind of that popped out to me is that here's someone who reinvents himself and picks up and just goes and goes to a new environment, creates a new persona, which sounds like what his father did. His father abandoned the family and decided, this is not what I'm doing. I'm going to go back to the US for whatever reason and start my family again. And Shiloh, what does Dr. Malloy say about that? What's the term he uses?
I don't remember. I mean, I know we've kind of said that it's alluded to some antisocial personality disorder.
Right. There's a term
with a lot of offenders.
Yeah, it's a term for antisocial, like that there may be a genetic, like a biological imperative that is built in to the sociopath or the psychopath, because they are not able to maintain intimate relationships, then they are driven to spread their seed in as many places as they can, which is also possibly, they theoretically may be one of the drives for rape.
Right,
so,
right.
Very interesting stuff. So he's in New York. Now he takes a job at a youth summer camp teaching, and he changes from John Berger to John Berger. And by this time, Hodel has gotten him on FBI's 10 most wanted list, which is great because back in the day, pre-social media, does anybody remember where it was always posted?
The post office, right?
In the post office, right? Yeah. So 2 young women, and by the way, he had gone into a job now where he's completely surrounded by underage females.
Yep.
And 2 young women go to mail a letter at the local post office and they see his face. Oh my gosh, that's Mr. Berger. They go back, report it to the counselors. Counselors call the police. He's caught. He's extradited back to California, and now he receives a life sentence. Again, 1974, released after 3 years. It's unbelievable. But like we were saying, they were unable to convict him of rape and attempted murder without the primary witnesses. So they got him for child molestation. So moving forward, he only does like this minimum amount of time. Less than 2 months after his release, he's rearrested for assaulting a 13-year-old identified in the court records as Julie J. He goes back to prison again, gets out, and his parole agent allows him to go to NYC. That is something that has radically changed. Like, that does not happen anymore. Like, the process of changing your parole location, even within the state, is a huge paperwork deal, and it takes forever.
It shows how good he was at just talking his way out of things.
Oh yeah, completely bullshitting his way through so much. So now he goes back to SoCal, and this is where really sort of the key victim, a young girl named Robin, who was on the beach in Orange County, she disappears, and she had been with her friend. The friend's mother, as he had approached these 2 girls and done the whole photographer presentation to them, I take your pictures, like I need to put my portfolio together. And Robin's friend's mother happened to be in the area, and she's like, what's going on? Why are you talking to this guy? So that breaks them up, but he follows Robin and is able to entice her into his car. Again, Robin Sanso. So Robin was very much a big part of how he was arrested for a number of reasons. But let's see, the next. So Robin disappears that afternoon. The next morning, which is another thing, was really big delay, which doesn't happen quite so much anymore.
Yeah.
The next morning, the police put together a composite sketch of, and they are calling it the photographer on the beach, and it completely matches his description.
And this is based on the mom, the witness?
This is based on the witness, and then the parole officer gets the facts of it, like, this is the guy, this is my guy, you got to find him. And then the other detective here that had been assigned to that case turns on the television in his office, and it's the episode of The Dating Game that had been filmed 10 months prior, right at that time. And he's like, this is the guy, this we got to get him. I mean, bizarre synchronicity and sort of confluence
Yes.
of events. It's crazy.
Oh.
So by the time that he had appeared on the dating game, that was in 1978 in the fall, he had already killed 5 women. And there are some writers that wonder if he was like spurred by the rejection he got on the dating game, because the woman that chose him, by the time they all got backstage, everybody was completely creeped out by him. The 2 guys that were his fellow contestants to this day say he was one of the weirdest and creepiest guys they'd ever met, that he would just kind of make non sequitur, nonsensical, almost argumentative remarks to them. Like they'd be having a conversation and then he would jump in with something that just didn't make sense.
Yeah, nobody likes that.
Nobody likes that. So I don't know. I think that's kind of, I think that's pushing it to actually say that those things were necessarily connected, that he was motivated by that. But it is an interesting.
Well, and she never went on a date with him. She was like,
no,
"He's so
she did
creepy,
not.
like, forget this." Tori in the chat says, "How narcissistic to go on a TV show." I mean,
absolutely,
truly,
yeah,
right?
really, it's Tori. That's exactly right. It's completely in line with that personality type of. I mean, this is another guy, much like Bundy, who thought he was so smart that he was just going to be able to keep getting away with it. And to some extent, he had been quite successful. And we don't even know the extent of what he was successful to. But
True.
The good thing is that people like this usually trip themselves up by their insane level of false confidence, and false bravado. So there's a weird thing that I looked over the research, and this was really confusing because one of his victims was supposedly observed him dragging a body into. He was observed by forest rangers dragging a small something that looked like a body and then leaving, and nobody stopped him, and nobody examined what it was, because that body was then found by rangers 2 or 3 weeks later, and all that was left was bones because wildlife had gotten to it.
What the hell?
Yeah, so it's interesting because that particular person, the forest ranger that supposedly saw it, was not allowed to take part in the the legal proceedings, because there was an accusation that he had been hypnotized by the police. So his testimony was not going to be suitable anymore.
Right. So hypnotized to remember to try and get more details and the occurrence.
Right.
Yeah.
At least that's the way I understand it. I mean, I've got to go back and read. I know that there's an LA Weekly article from 2010 that supposedly goes in that depth. We used to have a magazine here, LA Weekly, which was the best investigative journalism. It was fantastic. And of course, it's just gone the way of most newspapers now.
Yeah.
So he was finally arrested. By this time, he was living with his parents. And when they arrested him, they found a receipt for a storage unit in Seattle, Washington. When law enforcement opened that storage unit, they found thousands of photos of women, children, and boys. Many of them, vast majority, have never been identified. I believe about 900 photos.
Good Lord.
I think it's 900 photos. They actually still are on the internet.
Yeah.
One victim in Wyoming was identified through that, and they're still, the FBI and law enforcement still promotes this. If you know these people, please recognize this. But the vast majority of the photos they couldn't use because they were very sexually explicit. Interestingly enough, the sexually explicit photos did not show any evidence of being coerced. So it looks like people were willing participants
in posing for photography.
Session. Right.
Yeah.
But now something like an additional factor is that it's not only, adult women and young women, it is young men. I mean, young boys too. It's children,
boys, girls,
basically he's producing child sex images or child inappropriate images. Crazy stuff. So while they were going through the photos, they find a silk brocade embroidered pouch that was very feminine looking, like red with a lot of different colors, looks sort of like Asian type imagery. And within that silk pouch was a lot of jewelry, primarily earrings. So now they found his trophy case.
Yep.
And what's interesting is that as many challenges as they had in adjudicating this, the thing that really pushed everything forward in the mid 80s was now the new technology of DNA. In fact, they found a decades old minuscule piece of DNA on one of the earrings that identified one of the victims that was unknown.
Wow.
So they were able to get him on that charge. And then they were also at this point able to go back and look at all of the samples that were taken from the bodies. And sorry, this is really gross, folks. I apologize for this. This is just horrible. But the way it's described in the documentary is that his DNA, basically his sperm DNA, was basically just smeared all over his victims' bodies.
Yeah.
Like just a brutal and ugly,
Right.
way of his a way of him completing these crimes that he committed. So, what was that? Sorry.
And they found a pair of earrings that was Robin's, the girl who had disappeared on the beach, right? So they were able
his
to
big
connect
argument. So when he goes back to trial, and that's one of the main pieces of evidence are Robin's earrings, is that he comes up with this whole alternative history that those were his earrings. And you could tell that they were men's earrings because the posts were thicker, but they were able to identify that they were Robin's by the DNA. And also another person that was brought forward was one of his fellow male contestant on the dating game, who came forward to say, not only was it not in style for a guy in Southern California to be wearing earrings like that, I remember everything about him and how crazy his hair was. He was not wearing earrings.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's very interesting that they brought this witness forward.
Yeah.
So this history of being arrested and convicted and then overturns within a few years, it all kind of culminates in this penalty phase in 1984. The argument there was that the jury should not have been informed that he had been previously convicted for molesting a girl in 1968.
Oh.
So finally, in 1986, he is found guilty for Robin's death. He's now sentenced to death for a second time, and it gets overturned again.
Oh my God.
The family is just going through hell. Now, the worst part of all of this is that in the next iteration of this trial, this terrible trial system, is that he's now representing himself and he gets to cross-examine Robin's mother.
Ugh.
So even the documentaries talk about how bizarre it was that the judge would not make a stipulation that he had to remain seated or that he had to not go beyond a certain line. And what many of the people that were there report about how uncomfortable everyone was in the court, that he kept going really close to the mom and asking her questions and then moving back and back.
Intimidating her.
I mean, just horrific. You can't even imagine how much the family must have been through.
Yeah. Do you remember the name of the documentary that you've watched? Ashley's asking.
It's on, you know what? I'll find it in a second.
Okay. We can put some links in there. We
will, yeah. But that's what I wanted to just sort of put some light on. I have, as I'm sure many of us here, there's just a lot to talk about when it comes to the death penalty. One of the reasons that there's a lot to talk about is that it's been proven over and over again that the death penalty does not act as a deterrent to crime. No. It just doesn't. Would it bring some closure to families? It might, but then many families who are the families of victims whose perpetrators have been executed, they end up getting interviewed, years later, and they say that like it didn't give them any resolve. It made very little difference. The majority, there are some people that are like, yeah, he or she's gone. I'm happy about it. That makes me feel better. But the majority of people, it doesn't. I think it's one of those things that that we have this reaction to that is so strong in the moment, is just that we want resolution and we want it right now. Especially for someone like that. I mean, clearly this guy was a complete monster. He was an absolute monster.
Yeah. I mean, you know, we talk a lot about using that term and why we use it. And if we're going to throw that label on anyone, he 100% deserves it. So actually, just February of this year, another victim came forward who had never come forward before. And she actually reached out to Steve Hodel.
Oh my gosh.
And she is now, just, you know, earlier this year, I'll put the link to the article in the Washington Examiner, but she reaches out to Steve Hodel via his website and says, I've never come forward with this, but I was a victim of Alcala's, and turns out her name is Morgan Rowan, and she was attacked about 6 weeks before Tolly. So same apartment where Tolly was nearly murdered and where she was raped, the Hollywood apartment. And Steve Hodel says there's no doubt that she's telling the truth. She has accurately described things from that time that only someone who was there would know about his apartment. So in 1968, she and her friends, she was 16 at the time. So she and her friends were out, you know, on the Sunset Strip. They were out dancing, and she had said that she had seen him out and about in Hollywood before, and that while it was always kind of this teen young adult scene, here was this guy who was older and like always out of place, and that's how she remembers him. So he was kind of familiar to her in that she had seen him around, and she and her friends ended up getting into his car, believing that they were all just going to go to an IHOP restaurant after a night of dancing. And he instead said that he was having a party at his apartment and drove them to his apartment. And in fact, there were other people there. There was music playing. And as they get there and, you know, her friends kind of start doing their own thing or whatever, Alcala takes her, drags her into his bedroom and bars the door shut. And then he proceeds to beat her totally bloody. It's really awful. She said, quote, "I knew I was going to die. He tied my hands and put a belt in my mouth and punched me in the stomach until I vomited blood.
And
it was filling my lungs." She says, "I was drowning and his rage was so apparent that I knew he would kill me." So her friends he rapes her, and her friends eventually realize that she's nowhere to be found. They go looking for her. They try his bedroom door, see that know that it can't open and that it's barred from the inside. So I think there were some guys in the group, but they go around to a window and break the window and break into his bedroom. And he's standing there naked from the waist down with her blood all over him.
Whoa.
And she said, he tells my friends, just take her. Like he owned her. Like, okay, just take her, get her out of here. And then they get her out. They are all terrified of him at this point. So they're like hiding in an alley behind a dumpster while she's spitting up blood. And he kind of comes out. They can see him come out and kind of look around for him. But then they are able to get away. And she never reported it. Well, let me take that back. She doesn't tell her parents, but her friends encourage her to call the police. So I know in the chat room, there's some conversation about this time period and sexual assault. This is going to drive you guys nuts. But basically the police come out when they're at her friend's house. Yeah. And this uniformed officer, she said, is standing over her and looks at her face and goes like, "Boy, that's going to be a shiner in the morning." You know, that's his response to this 16-year-old being beat up, and then tells her, what do you expect with your mini skirts and your go-go boots? So you go to this guy's house and into his room, and then he literally says, I'm not seeing where this guy goes to jail for rape. Just, I know.
It was a different world.
It was a different world.
It was a very different world.
What is she, you know, at that point, she said the officer did not even ask for his name, wasn't even interested in identifying who this person was. So it basically dies there. She did not tell anyone for all of these years until she reached out to Steve Hodel. And then she and Tally have come together and ended up,
that's great.
You know, sort of connecting. But I'm going to put a copy of, or a link to this article so you guys can...
So has Tally been interviewed about this since, or in any of the documentary materials?
I don't know, but I think she had been, I think she had testified as an adult.
Okay.
Maybe it was in sentencing or something like that. I don't know if you saw any of that in the documentaries, but I saw pictures of her on the stand as an adult.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. But just horrific. And here, you know, is the first, well, I'm sure there were many victims before this, but really like another victim before poor little Tally, right in that same apartment and everything. So what an awful time, awful thing.
Yeah, people forget, like, you know, it's always certain individuals saying, oh, I wish we could go back to the good old days. I'm like, what good old days are you talking about? Are you talking about the ones where, you know, people of color had to sit at the back of the bus and, you know, drink at certain water fountains, and women were expected to, you know, it's
right.
Just mind-boggling.
No thanks. No thanks. Yeah. Well, I'm
to the house. Shannon goes, yeah, right.
Yeah. I'm glad he's not eating up taxpayer dollars anymore here in California.
I do too, and I sincerely agree, and I really hope that for the survivors that are still around and the victims' families, I hope that this gives them some sort of relief that it's just, this part is over.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The grief, the trauma is not over, but at least knowing that he's gone.
Yeah. Well, how should we end this on a good note? What's a good thing that happened to you this last week, Scott?
I'll tell you what a good thing is, and I'm gonna use this for all of our listeners who are here today on Get Vocal and here on Facebook to my right that I keep looking over at. I learned something really valuable in the last few months. I went through something. I'll probably go into this in a future episode, but I'm not going to go into too much explanation here. But about 2.5 months ago, I went through an enormous loss in my life, like huge chapter in my life loss. And I got great support from, of course, my lovely co-host and best friend, Shiloh, my co-workers, my supervisors, really were there for me. But what I didn't do is I did not engage in the levels of self-care that I am always preaching about to my private practice clients, to the people I meet on a regular basis. And it had a major effect on me. It wore me out in ways that I was not expecting. And I had my supervisor was one of the ones that said, I think you need to take some time off. Just take some time off. And I'm one of those guys, and I'm not bragging about this. I think this is actually quite shameful, but I'm telling myself, is I've got scads of vacation that I have not used.
Yeah.
I'm a typical American drone in that I have not taken advantage of all the benefits that I'm actually supposed to take so that I take care of myself. So what did I do over the past week and a half? Basically, is I took a week and a half off. I went to the mountains for a few days, which was absolutely lovely. It's my relaxation place. And then I was off, not going anywhere, just hanging at home and relaxing and going to the gym and sleeping probably more hours a night than I've ever been able to sleep a night.
Good for you.
So I just want all of us to realize, like, I don't know what's going to happen with Delta. I have no idea what's coming up. I hope everybody's going to continue to be safe, because there are clearly breakthrough infections that are happening. Luckily, the vaccinated breakthrough infections are not leading to hospitalizations, which is wonderful.
Right.
But we're not out of the woods yet, folks. And that leads to the big issue that I'm talking about, is that this has been 18 months of unrelenting stress. And we have all, as a country and as a culture and a society, and individually, I think we've done really amazing things. We've shifted like how we work, how we interact with people, how we take, but we're ignoring that this is a huge, traumatic, world-changing event.
Yeah.
We've been compartmentalizing that and wrapping it in a little box, and I'll put it over here on this shelf, and then I'll look at it later, and then we never do. And then we have to put another box. So I'm just encouraging people, right now is actually the most dangerous time for all of us emotionally, because we feel like we're tentatively out of the woods. And that's when the boomerang effect of holding all those emotions in for the past year and a half really gets serious. So please take care of yourself. If you need to schedule a therapy session, or
Take some
event
time off
session
work.
with friends, take time off work.
Yeah.
While things are slowing down, take time off if you can afford it. And I realize that in saying that, that comes from a place of privilege, and I own that. And I know not everybody can do that. So if you can't do it, please find some way to take care of yourself in a healthy way. Have that virtual toolbox by your side of coping skills, whether it's journaling, listening to music. Everybody's got to exercise. I'm so sorry. I mean, I'm just going to tell it, you have to exercise.
Yeah.
You have to get all of those chemicals in your brain moving again. And whether it's walking briskly or whatever, or getting back to the gym. Getting back to the gym was like literally getting a jab of, Effexor in my rear.
Yes. Oh my God. It's like you told me every time you were at the gym, you're like, this is so amazing.
Oh my God, this feels so good.
That's awesome.
Schedule it. Schedule your self-care. I am now like 20 minutes a day that everything shuts down and it's just stretching.
Good.
Not a full-on yoga, not a full-on anything, just stretching with my earbuds in, listening to like weirdo ambient music, because that's the kind of that's how I flow.
Stretching music.
Yeah.
For your forensical, your musical that you're going to write. It's about forensic psychology.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. Mary Elizabeth Welsh on Facebook says, while shared joy is multiplied, shared pain is lessened. And I think that's incredibly profound. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate that.
Well, I got to do a neat thing this morning. One of my field training officers from 18 years ago is starting a podcast. He left local law enforcement and now works at a district attorney's office as an investigator there. And he's starting a podcast about people who transition out of law enforcement and the military, and then what they do afterwards, or what their second jobs are. So I'm going to be I was the first person he interviewed. I don't know what order his podcast is going to be in. But it was so neat to sit down with somebody who trained me 18 years ago, and us to just, take it all in that it's been that long, but to talk about my journey out of law enforcement and then sort of back around into it in this capacity, and talk about a lot of wellness type stuff and what we've been through in the last 18 months.
Yeah.
And I hadn't seen him in several years. I think we got together for lunch maybe 7 years ago or something. But it's so cool. I mean, I love that he's talking to people that are doing all sorts of different things, former cops who roast their own coffee beans now, or that are in real estate, or all these different things. And I think it's really important when we look at how do we identify in our jobs, going back to you talking about, being slaves to our jobs here in America, that you're so much more than just what you do for a job, and to have other things that you enjoy and other roles that you identify with will just help you transition out of your job one day, or just going to make you a healthier person when you're someone else. in other roles.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. I can't wait to listen to it. And I think that the issue, I will say this is, I think, going to be helpful to some people. We have in a few weeks, we have another listener questions episode coming up that I think is going to be really great. In that I was able to go back and basically do a spreadsheet on all of the great questions that have come in really for the last 10 months. Because we just
So you were working during your vacation.
No. I didn't do it during this vacation. I promise you I didn't. But some of them are great. Some of them are a little challenging because we have some people who have gotten a little prickly on some of the things that we've said here, which is completely understandable. But there's one that I'm particular that I want to talk about. But I think that the self-care thing is just so, especially like Shannon is sharing something here about that she's, she gave her Myers-Briggs indicator score, which I thought was lovely. And, she's somebody that she's a caregiver, and I'm a caregiver. And, if you're a caregiver, you got to be really careful, because you can't, if you give so much of your energy out to others and you're constantly depleted, then you're not going to be able to take care of people, because you're going to get sick and you're going to get tired. And so we, once again, take care of ourselves. If you need ideas for coping skills, maybe I'll post them on the website or something.
Sounds good. She said she can out caregive you.
I bet you.
Let's make it a competition.
You'll give me a run for my money. I bet you will.
Oh my gosh. Well, it's so nice to see all of your little faces and bubbles and see your chats here. Everybody, all of our new people here tonight and our oldies but goodies. Abby, so glad that you could make it tonight as well. And it's 5 o'clock. It's after. So I guess we're done here. Go about your business, people.
Have a nice cocktail or a mock. We'll see you next week on.
Yeah. LA.
Behind the couch, not so.
Confidential.
Bye, everybody.
All right, take care, guys. Good to see you.